Hey there, Mike again, back with another video. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about rigging, and in particular, I know this is a little ways off yet, but rigging a dry dropper setup and a couple of different ways to do that, and maybe some ideas about why you'd want to do it certain ways. First thing we're going to talk about is leaders. When I'm fishing dries, I certainly use a tapered leader, generally use an off-the-shelf leader. I may modify that a bit, which we might talk about in another video. But just one real quick tip about leaders here. When you take a leader out of a package, it's going to be wrapped up like this, with the butt end generally wrapped around to kind of secure the whole thing. So the first thing you want to do, of course, is unwrap that, and to kind of see where that goes, you can kind of push just a little bit to see where that butt section comes out, and then you unwrap it from the leader itself. I do it by putting my fingers through the leader and kind of pulling to unwrap it. That way you're kind of minimizing any tangles and frustrations when you kind of unwrap that thing and get it ready to go. So out of the package, these things will obviously be pretty twisted, and that's not ideal. So stretching them, and you may or may not do this in your own fishing, but it's a really good idea to stretch these things and straighten them out before you start fishing them. So I just take and grab the butt end and start pulling. A little bit of friction with my hand adds a little bit of heat, and that will straighten that out nice and straight and go all the way to the tip and end of that. Get as many kinks out of there as you can. All right, that's dealing with leaders a little bit. Okay, two basic ways to rig a dry dropper setup. For most common way, I'll go through initially here. I personally, and a lot of this that I'm going to share in these videos is a lot of personal preference, my personal preference, things I've learned over the years of doing this and just the way I like to do things. So, keep in mind, I'm sure there's other ways to do things. Other people have other opinions about this stuff. So keep an open mind about it. These are just my own opinions. All right, dry dropper rig. So I personally will only do a dry dropper rig with a large dry fly. That's because I like my dry flies to float, and a smaller dry fly that you have to kind of continually manage and mend and dry off and whatnot, that doesn't float very well. I just don't like that. I don't think that's very efficient. I don't think it works very well. So I will only really do a dry dropper rig with, in this case, a chubby, hoppers, big foam flies, things like that, a larger fly. So the way I rig this, tie this onto the leader, my tippet, I use a loop knot. In this case, it's a double surgeon's loop. There are some no-slip loops out there as well that you can use. We'll go over some of those loop knots in another video, but I like to use a loop knot just because it allows a little more free movement in the fly, particularly with these big flies. And fishing, I'm fishing the Madison, 90% of the time, and all those little microcurrents and things. You kind of want those flies to swing as freely as possible, and also using kind of heavier tippet as well. Generally, with these big dry flies, I'm using 3X, sometimes even 2X, with salmon flies and things like that. So that's pretty stiff tippet material. So I use a loop virtually all the time on these bigger dry flies, whether or not I'm fishing with a dropper, just to allow them to swing a little more freely, add a little more life to those things. Okay, so as I said, the most basic, and in my mind, probably the best rig here to add a dropper to this dry fly is to tie a piece of tippet material to the bend of the hook. Caveat about this, the one thing, and this is another reason that I will only do this with larger flies, is you do not want to impede the gap or gape. By the way, those two words are interchangeable in hooks. The gap or gape, hook gape, is the distance between the point of the hook and the shank of the hook. So if you're trying to use a fly that has a fairly small, this one is relatively large, this hook gape. If you're trying to use a fly that has a smaller hook gape on this, and you add a piece of tippet material, you can sort of imagine that fish coming up and trying to eat that thing. It's very possible that he's going to bump that tippet and knock that smaller fly out of the way, because a lot of times they'll try to, it's a little more subtle rise, a little more subtle, so they'll kind of be able to push that smaller fly out of the way by hitting that with their nose. And again, my opinions, just my thought about it. I'm sure there's lots of differing opinions on that, but anyway, different story. Okay, so piece of tip material, it's going to generally be lighter than the tippet that's going to the fly itself, because I will really only use smaller flies, smaller little bead heads, in this case, a little jig hook Perdigon for this. So I'll generally go with 3X, maybe 4X on this dropper. This is a fairly short one. You can, of course, vary that length depending on how you're fishing. If you're fishing the banks, I generally go shorter. If you're fishing the middle or whatever, go a little bit longer. Kind of just depends on your situation, obviously, any number of lengths here. And so that's a real basic. Tied to the bend of the hook, and then tie your little bead head to the bend of that. We're using clinch knots for both those knots. Again, we'll cover some of those knots in another video. Okay, so that is, I don't know that I know anybody who uses any other rig than that when they're doing a dry dropper rig. There is, however, another way to do it, which you may prefer. I've got this already rigged up here. So again, a bigger dry fly. This I just did a clinch knot to the leader, to the tippet, and then added another piece of tippet material to the eye of the hook on this one. So the hook gape or gap is completely free, nothing in there. And then tying our little bead head, a little fly to the end of that. So, another way to do it, play around with it, see what you like better. It does keep all the tippet, no matter hook size, obviously out of the bend of the hook. So you may end up getting better hookups with that. For some reason, I like the flies to be more in line. When you're casting them, seems to be less tangles, things like that. So play with both, see what you think. You let us know in the comments below. Appreciate it. We'll be back again with more tips and tricks.